A 1-inch chunk has a surface area, at best, 6 square inches. The same chunk shattered into thousands of fragments has 1,000 times more. And so we're looking at surface area and the way for the microbes to bond to that carbon.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Sustainable Agriculture specialists Andrew Coggins and John Wallace talk about biochar and NCAT's use of biochar in its small-scale intensive farm training program. John runs NCAT's SIFT farm at the nonprofit's headquarters in Butte, Montana. SIFT does sustainable agriculture trials at the farm, including some that have focused on biochar. John and Andrew talk about renewed interest in biochar as a means of sequestering carbon and as a soil amendment and even a possible soil enhancement. Let's listen.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Coggins, a sustainable ag expert based in Butte, Montana. And today I'll be talking with John Wallace, the SIFT farm manager, also in Butte, about biochar and NCAT's past involvement with biochar and how we got to where we are now. So, hi, John. Nice to see you again.
How's it going, Andrew? So I've been working out on the SIFT farm for a few years now, and we've been doing different trials. SIFT is the small-scale intensive farm training program based here in Butte, Montana. It's attached to the NCAT headquarters here. And what we do is we do trials and demonstrations for the community to teach how to grow food sustainably. And one of the things we've been interested in is the topic of biochar and how that can work for carbon sequestration and also potentially as a soil amendment or even potentially an enhancement. So I had some questions for you, Andrew.
Mhm.
I am a little bit unfamiliar with some of the past work of the NCAT's biochar research. So what is NCAT's past involvement in biochar research?
Well, I've not been with NCAT all that long either, John, but it does appear that we've been actively involved in evaluating biochar for quite some time. And I was aware of an ATTRA publication in 2010 entitled Biochar and Sustainable Agriculture, and also an ATTRA video in 2014 on building a biochar retort kiln. I'm sure there's other material as well, but those are the two that I'm actively aware of.
So what do you think has caused a renewed interest in biochar since then?
Well, we're all aware of the effects of global warming with increasing temperatures, drought, and wildfires. Biochar is one project that claim to increase carbon sequestration and boost soil health, either alone or charged with compost, for example. So with all the waste wood and fallen timber being cleared from forests across the country to mitigate fire risk, biochar could be more valuable than wood chips or wood pellets, and certainly better for the environment, I feel, than slash piles.
So how has NCAT reacted to this?
Well, NCAT started the biochar policy project in 2019, and that was set up to support the development of a carbon negative biochar and biofuel industry and help create real jobs, sequester carbon, and build soil health. Chuck Hasselbrook volunteered to be the project's director and help pursue the aims of increasing federal investment into pilot projects, research, and biochar production methods. One of the aims of this project, John, is to kickstart private investment and private interest in commercial pyrolysis facilities to produce biochar for sale. And this has been neatly summarized in an ATTRA blog written by NCAT's Executive Director Steve Thompson in 2021, entitled Biochar Policy Project Aims to Scale Up Rural Climate Solution.
And so when you say pyrolysis, this isn't just your regular charcoal, right? You're not just incinerating wood. This is more of a process that takes oxygen out of the production, and so essentially you're left with just carbon in the end, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, you've got it, John. Yeah.
Is NCAT aware of any local examples where biochar production from fallen timber might be justified?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Basin Creek Reservoir and Water Treatment Plant, just south of Butte, is the city's principal source of drinking water, approximately 60%, according to Jim Keenan, who's the manager of the water treatment plant there. Now, surrounding that site are several hundred acres, mainly lodgepole pine, and much of that fallen timber is lying on the ground, therefore posing a significant fire risk if it's not cleared. Up to an estimated 50 tonnes an acre, he reckons. So as we said, this presents a significant fire risk to the water treatment plant, as well as the environmental damage that will cause. There is a financial cost as well to closing the plant.
So if there were to be a wildfire in this Basin Creek Reservoir area, is essentially the risk that it's going to fill up with sediment and kind of block the ability for them to clean the water for municipal use?
This presents the lodgepole pine that's fallen presents a significant fire risk to the water treatment plant. And as well as the environmental damage that will cause, the financial cost of closing the plant and sourcing water from elsewhere will be huge. The challenge, therefore, is whether to chip the fallen timber on site, create slash piles, pellet it, or process it perhaps into an added value product like biochar to recover some of the costs of clearing the area. And the other big question, of course, is what is the dollar value of biochar and its value as a soil amendment and carbon sequester, which we don't really know yet.
I'm familiar a little bit with different uses of biochar, especially as not just a soil amendment and agricultural use, but also for reclamation and helping clear up heavy metals in the water.
Yeah.
Kind of like a carbon filter in a sense. So one of the things I'm interested in is what is the value and demand of the biochar that could be created and the demand in this area. Is that something that's being looked at?
Well, it is a little bit, John. Yeah, as you probably aware, I've been to quite a few conferences recently and workshops. And one I went to was late last year. In addition to the Basin Creek trips, which I've just mentioned, late last year I went across to Bonner, near Missoula in Montana, in October 2022. And there, timber was being cleared by the Forestry Service down to about 10% of the original stand. And that was being processed into biochar by a big machine called a Tiger carbonator, possibly the biggest mobile machine out there at the present time. And then in the same week, I went to a series of workshops in Dillon, Montana, with a colleague, Jeff Shazinski. And this was hosted by the Forestry Service, specifically the Rocky Mountain Research Station. And this included a visit to Medicine Lodge, some 40 miles southwest of Dillon, on Bureau of Land Management, BLM land. And this area was actually being clear felled of conifers to restore aspen and sagebrush habitat. And present on this site were several different biochar production systems, including Dave Atkins and his Ring of Fire, and a commercially made towable firebox called a burn boss, both obviously producing biochar. Dave, for the record, has had a long career in the Forestry Service and also a long-term interest in biochar as a carbon sequester and soil health improvement tool.
So to someone maybe listening to this who doesn't really understand what this equipment might look like, do you think you could describe that?
Yeah, I could a little bit. Yeah, certainly. Basically, the Ring of Fire is basically literally a ring, a circular ring, with wood material put in the bottom, superheated, so that air gets all around it and pyrolysis is allowed to occur. The burn box is a very similar machine. Imagine a rectangular box, John, with air vents all the way around the sides to superheat the wood that's being turned into biochar. When the biochar is complete, the burn box body is actually lifted off and the bed remains with the biochar on it. So they're both fairly simple tools that just exercise the principles of pyrolysis, really. Pyrolysis. And really the Tiger carbonator is very similar in many ways. It's a much bigger machine. It does involve water cooling within it to keep the biochar cool down. but it does also involve lots of forced air through the system and superheated temperatures. So the principle of biochar production is quite straightforward and common across all the machines.
So essentially, you're creating a machine where you can not necessarily incinerate or combust wood, but you are choking it off of oxygen,
Yes,
but still holding very high temperatures so that you can create a carbon material.
in essence, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, last month, literally last month, well, nearly 2 months ago now, May, I went down with Steve Thompson, our CEO, and Eric Nyland, who's John Tester's natural resources advisor, to the Southern Mountain Lumberyard down at Deer Lodge, which is fairly close to Butte for those that don't know it. And again, the Tiger Cat carbonator was being demonstrated again. But this time the waste timber was actually stacked up right next to the machine, ready for processing. And this was a useful exercise for me, particularly because with the material stacked so close to the machine, we had the opportunity to assess how much that machine could produce per week of biochar in the optimal circumstances, as it were. And also seen Sean Steinbach, the outreach forester down there with Sun Mountain. He was very helpful too. And he provided the operating costs for the machine and the match funding, and we got some useful economic data from the visit.
Don't have time to stay up to date on the freshest sustainable agriculture news, events, and funding opportunities? You can trust NCAT to keep you connected with our weekly harvest e-newsletter. Subscribe today at ncat.org and get your weekly harvest delivered each Wednesday.
Yeah, so I assume that if a farmer is trying to use this product, one, they're going to want to know what the cost is. They're probably interested in application rates, and they probably are looking at effectiveness. So I'm wondering what happened to the biochar that was produced at the demo.
Well, on the biochar that was produced, we contacted Sean the week after, and he kindly well, both of us, as you know, we went down in the pickup to pick up some biochar, about 0.8 cubic yards in the back of the pickup. The total biochar produced down there, he estimated around 40 cubic yards. Most of that was destined for field trial work. But as I say just now, Sean kindly let us have some of that biochar, and we've brought it back to the SIFT farm, as you know, John. And I'd like to know from you now, really, how we've started using it within the trials.
Yeah, so we did get a little bit of this product, and one of the things I think that we're trying to look at is the feasibility of how this would work for farmers. And so, for instance, we got it picked up by, a pickup truck. We loaded up the back of it. We weighed it. I think weight versus volume is a big issue when it comes to a material that can have a large amount of water holding capacity. So what we were really trying to look at is try to figure out what an application rate looks like for the average farmer. There's two things there. I mean, there's also the ability to use it in a vegetable production that maybe uses tillage. And so there you're able to work it into the ground. Yet there's also the ability to potentially use this on rangeland and to sequester carbon maybe on larger acres. But those types of operations aren't going to be able to work that type of material into the ground at depth. So what we decided to do was to take the raw material in what we received it, which is quite large chunks. And so we're basically taking a trial plot and we're cutting it into 4 sections, and we're applying it directly on top and working it into the ground in a separate plot. Now, we were looking at where to actually trial this, and most of our demonstration farm works on a type of crop rotation. So it really wasn't feasible for us to get information out of this type of trial without having a steady sort of crop there. And so for that, we actually chose our cover crop plot. Our cover crop plot is designed to help generate benefits to the soil for our specific soil type. We have a broken down granite that is largely sand with a very small amount of silt. And so what we are trying to do is build organic matter with our cover crop trial plot. But now we're adding different levels of biochar, compost, and a biochar compost mix. Because from my research, I kind of understand that if you just apply biochar in its raw form, that you could essentially be locking out nutrients because the microbes are going to have to take time to actually fill into this biochar. And essentially, if you look at biochar under a microscope, you're going to see a honeycomb effect. And so a 1-inch chunk has a surface area at best 6 square inches. The same chunk shattered into thousands of fragments has 1,000 times more. And so we're looking at surface area and the way for the microbes to bond to that carbon. So first thing we did is we took the raw form that we received it in and tried to crush it. We did that using a wood chipper. It didn't work so well. And understanding that this is probably going to be a barrier for other farmers to be able to use this product, to have to do one more step in the process of applying from what it's sourced as, we decided to see if we could apply it in that form in the larger chunks, either on top, maybe like what a rancher would be doing, or tilling it into the ground. So the block is broken up into 3 places where we've been trying to identify. I mean, as you know, tillage can affect the microbe matter and hurt the fungal matter
Right. Yeah.
significantly. And so when you look at no-till operations, that's where you're going to see your highest growth in fungal matter. So what we decided to do was to do a little bit of all of it, to say, hey, there's farmers out there who maybe are interested in carbon sequestration. They're interested in water holding capacity, which our soil here, being mostly sand, really holds the properties that the water runs through it. It doesn't really have a chance to stop and hold into that organic matter. And so the application rate is definitely going to depend on the type of soil. We saw an opportunity to use quite a bit, but the optimum rate of biochar application ranges between 1% and 5% for volume. And it's even estimated that it can range from 2 to 22 tons per acre. And that's a wide range.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of those things that we're looking at is how do we come up with a number, an application rate to do service to farmers who want to adopt these types of sustainable ag methods. And one of them is looking at the amount per volume. And that can be hard. So the first thing we did is we measured it and weighed it and tried to come up with a weight and volume application rate.
Yeah.
So while we're still on the lower side of that 1 to 5% volume, what matters is that tilling, because now you're talking about working in biochar in at a depth of up to 6 inches. And so that translates essentially for 1 cubic yard of material, which is about what we had. I think we had 0.8. That's 54 square feet per 6 inches deep.
Right.
Where if you're just doing an overhead application, you're looking at closer to 2,000 square feet for just a 1/4 inch deep. And this is why you have to be very careful, is because this application could potentially be a 1 in 100 year application. So you don't want to over apply biochar because of that potential to lock out those nutrients. And essentially it's going to take time for those little microbes to fill into that tiny little honeycomb and basically build a home for themselves. And so that's why we're looking at different application rates, and as well looking at different inoculations. So if you can imagine, if you're just going to go drop all this surface area of the carbon into the ground and potentially lock out nutrients for maybe a few years, we're going to be trying to understand if it does do some sort of negative effect to the crops grown there. And luckily with our cover crop, we have multi-species cover crops. So essentially we have a mix of Otana oats, rye, triticale. Those are all your grasses. That's meant to have massive organic growth so that residue and material can break down and create higher organic matter. We have Phacelia and turnip. Those are your broadleaves that help cover the soil and protect it as an armor. Phacelia is also a very great um, uh, pollinator. So that's another reason why we do that. And then we have kind of our nitrogen fixers. And so that's where we bring in our Austrian winter peas and common vetch. So what's nice about this project is we're looking at basically at how these effects of biochar application can affect a wide range of crops with different root depths, different nutrient requirements, and to see if that affects how these things have grown from the past, which we've been doing data on through soil tests, we've been doing infiltration tests, and trying to get a better idea of what this amendment or soil enhancement potentially could be. And if there's a difference between inoculating it with mixed with compost versus just a straight application of biochar. Then we're also applying just straight compost to see if that affects it, and as well having a baseline of just nothing added. So it'd be very interesting to see how this affects the growth. If it does, is it going to be more anecdotal of us just seeing, crop height? Or is it going to be a different selection of what grows better there versus the grasses, the broadleaves, or the pulse crops? And there's a lot to read out of that. And so that's essentially what we're looking at as far as the SIFT biochar trial.
Okay, John, that makes sense. A few extra points on the benefits you're looking at as well, as a question. It can perhaps increase the water holding capacity of the soil. And how would you actually go about measuring some of these metrics and these benefits that you're talking about?
Yeah, so essentially research has been showing that some biochars can hold up to 7 times their own weight in water, while looking at the flip side, organic matter in itself, and this is just the life of the soil, the microbes that can grow within that. The way I look at it is biochar is the house, the microbes move in. And so if you're already adding 7 times their own weight of just with biochar, now you're adding or allowing the increase of microbes to grow. It's been shown that a 1% increase in organic matter can result in about 25,000 gallons of water available per acre. And so we're looking at a significant increase of water holding capacity. And as I mentioned, with our granitic soils, water likes to pass through it and not necessarily stay in that root zone. So we're doing everything that we possibly can to try to hold in the water that we get.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We're basically to read that and to measure it, we're going to be looking at infiltration tests, which is essentially where you take a ring and you can measure out the amount of water that fits in that ring and convert that to inches per acre, I guess, of the water, and how quickly that infiltrates into the ground. And then I like the basic method. I use a shovel and I use a Paul Brown probe, and essentially you can stick that into the ground and see how far that water infiltrates and measure the amount of time that it takes between waterings and the amount of water to see if you are increasing the capacity of that water to be held in the soil. So we're also looking, like as I said, is inoculation important? And how we did that is we mixed it with compost, but we didn't just mix it there. We had to let that sit for a while. And essentially you're giving that time for the organic matter of the compost to actually work its way into that kind of honeycomb. And so there can be different ways of even doing that. And so what we're going to do is incorporate that into more of a composting trial, maybe adding some of this biochar in through the composting process. And see if we can maybe take soil samples and prove that increased organic matter is in the soil. We can do that through soil tests. There's quite a few different ones out there, but really what we're looking at is the percent of organic matter that is in the water or is in the soil. So,
but it sounds like you're looking at some practical tests as well, John, that are easily explainable and demonstratable to people at workshops as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're here to do. Is it's very easy to to talk about some statistics about research, but to actually practically test it in your own soil type is a whole nother realm. And I think that's one of the abilities that we have, is to do these sort of, feasibility tests, practicality tests of, this is the resource and this is how we can best manage our soil with it. So as you know, any sort of combustion, and say, I know you explained some of those types of different equipment to create biochar. Some had their, their fortes, and in another way, you could essentially be creating some sort of ash. And ash has a pH issue. So we're also going to be taking soil tests to look at the pH and see if that has any negative effects. But for the overall project, I don't think that that's going to be a big issue, because our soil where we stand is about 6.5, pretty optimal, and it has a really big ability to kind of buffer. And so I don't think us adding a highly acidic material is going to change the overall pH with the application rate that we're looking at.
Right, yeah. But we will be taking soil samples on a yearly basis anyway. So again, I think it's fair to say, John, that we're covering all our bases, and if there is any change in soil acidity or alkalinity, we'll pick that up as well, though it's unlikely.
Exactly. And from here, it's very interesting, because we might have the potential to have one of those much higher application rates, more towards the 5% volume,
Yeah.
up to 22 tons per acre. And while we only plan on adding this once in this initial trial, we'll be able to see if any negative aspects come out of this, and then we can always adjust for the future.
That sounds great. Yeah. Well, thank you for chatting about it with me today, John. I think we're both learning about this process as we go along, but it's really interesting stuff and a fascinating subject as well. So I wish you best of luck with the trials as they proceed forward, certainly this year and into next. And it sounds like you've got a lot of different metrics involved with measuring this. So it will be interesting to see any results as they unfold.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for talking to me about this. I know a lot of questions I've gotten about biochar have been about demystifying the whole idea of it. And I think by approaching it from a practical level of what a farmer is going to receive and utilize is going to be the best for overcoming those barriers.
Yeah. Oh, sounds good. Okay, well, we'll speak again soon. Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.